Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. And before we begin, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to our channel below if you are on YouTube. And if you are following us on iTunes, please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episode. How are you today, Rob?
Good. We're continuing our series on emotions. And one of the least understood or most misunderstood emotions is shame. So we're going to delve into this idea of shame and maybe debunk a little bit of the myth of toxic shame. Because, we'll talk more about it, but the way we see emotions, there are no bad or good emotions. They're simply like emotions that we need to live in the world. So all emotions are useful. Whether we experience them as good or bad often is our own interpretation.
And so let's start off with, we're going to talk about the difference between shame and guilt, how to work with shame, and then really overcoming it, how to recognize it and how to overcome it. So the first one is the difference. What is shame? What is guilt? A lot of people mix them up. So I know I did. So
and
how would you define them?
They certainly overlap. And most of these emotions, we don't really experience them in isolation. Anger, shame, regret, guilt, they all kind of go together. But it's useful to think in terms of, what is this certain emotion that we've identified, labeled, and kind of pathologized as well. What is it talking about? So shame and guilt. Guilt is the idea that you did something wrong. I did something wrong, and I'm guilty of that behavior. Shame appears to be more of the kind of related to the self-concept of I am not good. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. It's not just the behavior that I performed or some action that I took out of recklessness or desperation, but there's something wrong with me fundamentally.
So we could feel guilty about keeping boundaries, for example. We saying no to someone, we feel guilty, but we don't feel this like I'm a terrible, well, sometimes people think I'm a terrible person because I did that. That would be shame. But you could feel guilty that, that I feel bad that person, I hurt that person, or I did something that may have made someone feel upset with me or angry. That guilt is sort of a natural response because we have empathy and, in our DNA to feel other people's feelings or sense what other people are feeling. So that's where that guilt comes from. But the shame is more personal. We personalize our behaviors and make it, the things we do define who we are. And that's how the ego is developed and measured a lot of many times. The ego wants to look at itself as all the things I do, everything I accomplish, and how people think of me is all defined by that ego self.
Yeah, and there are different models of it, of course. Just like in all psychology, there are different approaches to the mind, to working in a therapy model or in a coaching model. And so a lot of it depends on what model people are using to work with shame. Certainly from our coaching perspective in the Jungian model that we use, we see these emotions as useful. They're useful emotional energy that we can put to good work, to good use, instead of kind of approaching them as we need to heal them, we need to get rid of them, we need to somehow escape them. In the Jungian coaching approach, we move towards them. We actually invite them in because we want to make the unconscious conscious. And what are emotions if not our unconscious mind? Meaning it's a record of what we've absorbed instinctually, intuitively through the emotions, and that the mind has held on to as this is important information for you. Hold on to this. And we operate unconsciously through these emotional imprints that are in our unconscious mind.
But wouldn't you say that universally, as human beings, we have the roots of shame and guilt in our
Yes.
DNA? That we have, because we are social creatures, we need those.
Exactly, we need them because how would we know how to relate to others in these very kind of fluid relationships that we have as human beings? And if you think about a group of people, a tribe or a family, interacting among many individuals in very complex, very subtle ways, with strong emotional bonds, how else would you know when you need to repair a certain relationship, when you've transgressed against somebody else, or when you've done something really rotten and you should be ashamed of yourself, that you need to take responsibility and kind of own up.
Because if we don't have guilt or shame, then we do terrible things to people. And, so that would go on the borderline of, the insane, that do terrible things because they don't have that sense of empathy or the kind of understanding of what the pain another person's feeling.
Yeah, I mean, some of the definitions of psychopathology and personality disorders, it has to do with lack of empathy, right? That somebody doesn't have that sense of shame or guilt about what they do to other people.
So if you're shaming and guilting yourself, you're perfectly normal. You're not, needing, it's not a terrible thing that we have to fix in ourselves. It's more, how do we understand it and work with it? So what are the roots of shame? What are the, why do we have, besides the genetic, socially passed down from thousands of years of evolution of us becoming human beings and living in tribes and communities, what is the psychological root?
Yeah, so if you think about why would we experience shame as something negative and absorb it as there's something wrong with me, in a lot of psychologies, especially psychotherapies, the model is that anything that is kind of diminishing the self-worth, diminishing the sense of self, is pathological, and that the therapy is designed to cure that or to address that issue.
So you're not normal if you're feeling insecure or having self-esteem issues, or there's something you need to get to fix.
Yes,
according in the therapy model, and
that's implied because we have friends that are therapists, and they tell us, well, I don't necessarily see my clients as broken. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying that it's implied in the context of therapy.
In the medical model?
In the model that you're using. If it's a therapy model, it implies there's something to fix. There's something to therapize, right? To
therapize.
To work on.
Yeah.
And so we know human nature to be very contextual. Whatever context we're in socially, we adapt to that. And it's unspoken. These are unspoken rules. If I'm sitting across a therapist or somebody with a lab coat, a doctor, a physician, I take the role of a patient, meaning I'm passive. You're going to do something to me. You're going to help me fix something, therapize something to help me. And that person is going to play the role of the healer.
And you're called a patient, not a client, which in coaching it's
That's
a
right.
client, not a patient.
That's right.
So even that word patient is implying that there's some illness there.
Yes, so a lot of the popular models out there of shame, you see the books on toxic shame and all that, are derivative of those therapy models. Nothing wrong with that. It's important information for people to have out there. But again, when that's the only lens that people see shame through, then when they experience shame or they've had these experiences of shame in their past, they pathologize it. They think maybe there is something wrong with me.
Like I shouldn't feel this way,
Right.
and this terrible thing. I want to get rid of my shame, and I hate it, and
it's toxic.
terrible, and it's just negative vibration or something. And so when we think about that idea of the coaching model of shame, what would you say that is about? That it's really, for me, I see it as it's a natural emotion that we all deal with, guilt and shame, but it's in the definition and the self-concept that we have to look at in cognitive behavioral, which is a very popular way to think positive and say I'm good enough. That actually just builds up the ego. And in Jungian theory, we're really talking about transcending the ego.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of personal experience on this. As a young person, I felt shame in a lot of different ways. And the tendency of our mind is to push it into the unconscious mind. So this is where it gets toxic, or where people start to call it toxic, because it becomes the filter through which you see everything. Now, this is unconsciously, meaning I wasn't going around saying, I'm a bad person, or there's something wrong with me, therefore I'm going to experience everything through this lens. It happens automatically when you repress those emotions, those feelings, and you think, well, I'm just going to emphasize the positive, like you say, let me think positive. And I was a very positive thinking person at the conscious level, but at the unconscious level, I was feeling pretty rotten. So what happens when people push it away, when they're not able to express that feeling,
or acknowledge it, that they have
acknowledge it, right? Because it's, again, if it's labeled as something bad and toxic, you don't want to acknowledge that stuff, and it doesn't feel good to you, so you don't want to move towards it. You want to push it away, meaning repress it. Then it becomes toxic in the sense that it starts to filter, or it is the filter through which you experience life. Unconsciously. In other words, you, on the surface, you think, I'm doing my best, I'm thinking positive, etc. But let's say something great comes up in your life, a great relationship, a great job. Because you're filtering it through that sense of shame in the unconscious mind, you have to sabotage it. You have to make it bad. You have to prove to yourself that you're not worthy of these great things in your life, because inside you feel shame.
So can you feel, you can still feel conscious of it, but not really get to the root of it. So you can feel like you're aware that you kind of feel not good enough, but you're not really, the unconscious part is that emotional root. Is that what you're saying? Because there's people that don't realize they have it. And, and then there's people that kind of know I'm insecure. Like, I have to tell you, my very first personal growth workshop I went to was a self-esteem workshop. And self-confidence, and the woman made us do like activities, and she's like, change your thinking, change your thoughts. So it was like a lot of cognitive behavioral type of things, which was great because that gets you started on at least giving you some tools. But the thing is, we are just redefining our ego. And then what you said is that no matter how much someone praises you or wants you to be accepted, you'll find a way to sabotage it because you feel, I maybe not even realize it, but you're trying to gain approval, but you disapprove of yourself, so you'd reject the approval, like a friendships or relationships, or even a parent giving you a compliment would be like, you take it as a criticism in a way, bosses. Yeah,
that's a good point. I mean, a person can be conscious of what they've experienced in the past, but be unconscious of what really they're holding on to unconsciously in what they're repressing. And so the very fact that they're conscious of it, but labeling it as pathology, right? That I'm experiencing toxic shame or low self-esteem, as it used to be called, that there's something wrong with me. That's an important contribution then to the way they experience the emotion as well, because they are labeling it as pathology, as something wrong with me. That's the way you experience it. We know consciousness works that way. Whatever we contextualize as that this is what I'm experiencing, that becomes our way of experiencing it, working through it, the way of giving it meaning in a sense. And so people that are conscious of their shame, but are labeling it and identifying it as something to get rid of, something wrong with them, right? Something that means that there's something wrong with me and I need to be fixed. That becomes their paradigm of experiencing it.
So what you're really saying, and I've experienced this myself as well, is that you're conscious. You could be conscious of that you're not good enough, and then how you actually try to fix it in a way is to think more positive, shine up the persona, but also make some achievements. Like you start to go, and I'm going to make more money to prove I'm good enough. I'm going to find a relationship that someone that loves me, so I can feel that I'm worthy of love. I'm going to, impress my parents, so they give me that the accolades that I've been waiting for, my peers, and we're consciously trying to change the external, but the root is still feeling not good enough. So what happens is that we sabotage it. So even if we have success, we destroy it. Even if we have a great relationship, we push it away. So we it's like if we don't deal with the unconscious piece, we're still kind of in a cycle of chasing it out there, rejecting it out there, and then still stuck with this feeling. So what we need to do is go deeper and understand what is really going on, and really understand that it's not something to get rid of, but something to understand. Understand.
No, it's something to make conscious.
Yes, become aware.
Yeah, that's essentially the Jungian model, is that whatever is going on in the psyche, we should not be afraid of it. If we're willing to invite it into awareness, to be conscious of it, to acknowledge it, and work with it, right? If it's our own mind, why would we push certain elements away and say, I don't want to look at that? That's where people get into trouble, because as soon as you push something into the unconscious, it has more power to be experienced externally.
You know, an analogy I used to tell my clients is that imagine a little child walked into your room and was crying and needed comfort, and you're saying, don't cry, you shouldn't cry, you shouldn't express those feelings, you shouldn't be like that, and you just dismiss the child. That's what we're doing to these feelings of shame. We're just saying, you're not a part of me, you shouldn't be that way. And then what do you think would happen to that child if it's constantly pushed away? It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't resolve or help that child. What you want to do is talk to it, and it's like talking to a part of ourselves, not our inner child, but just talking to a part of ourselves, and understanding and becoming conscious of what's inside, what's that kind of energies. It has a lot of energy there. Let's invite it in. Let's see what is there.
Yeah, we can talk more about how do we work with it, but you had mentioned that when you were working with single women and coaching them, that a lot of them had shame in their psyche, right, in their mind. They were
ashamed many times of just being single. They would dread having to go to the family functions or the weddings and friends, and getting triggered every time someone says, do you have someone special in your life? Or when are you going to, meet someone? And they would feel this kind of, I'm not a part of the club. I'm not a part of the love club, the couple club. I used to feel that way too, that feeling accepted because now you're a couple, and that's how society's set up. So if you're single, you're kind of flailing out there in the middle of the ocean without a life raft, and you're waiting for someone. And that person you're putting all that onus on that other person to save you from shame. And that is just what you're going to do is you're going to attract people into your life that reinforce it versus actually change it. At first, maybe you feel temporarily lifted. Ooh, this person likes me. But either they'll be really annoying and you can't handle their love and accept, you push the people that love and accept you away, or you sabotage it and you find a way to be too needy and then push them away.
Right. So let's look at that scenario right there. From a therapy model, the idea would be this person is experiencing toxic shame that is injuring their self-worth, right? Their self-image, their self-esteem, as it used to be called. And then the therapy, I'm generalizing and simplifying just for the sake of an example. There are great therapies out there that work really well to help people. But that's the general approach, right? That there's something amiss because of the shame, that this person shouldn't feel ashamed. They should be able to deal with this in a more healthy, constructive way, right? Now, what happens in that model then is, again, the individual is pathologized. Their emotions are pathologized. Now, there's natural emotion, because if we look at the evolutionary perspective, the shame is there to give them a sense of what should they be doing with their lives and their relationships. And it's simply saying, if you want to be respected and you want to fit into the group that you value and that you've grown up around, you should be married, or you should be in a healthy or a relationship.
Or you should have children and all those things.
Yeah. And from the coaching model, we would say, well, let's approach it from that. Let's just take that at face value. Not that there's something wrong, but simply that the mind is indicating, because of its evolutionary history, that, it's saying you should try to be like the other people and fit in. Is there anything pathological about that? No. It's simply the way the mind works.
So seeing it more from a less personal place, but seeing, this is how the mind works. Yeah. You know, I had someone had me coach when I, way in the beginning, before I met you, she had me write down the reasons why I wanted a child, because I was like, I really want a baby so bad. And when I wrote down the reasons, it was all about fitting in. It was all about family pressure, feeling that my family would accept me more if I had the traditional life that everyone else had. And that there was some sort of security in that. And I was really surprised by just that simple exercise of, why do I want this? Just questioning, is this what I really want, or is this my ego just fitting into the old conformative patterns that makes me stick with society?
Yeah. And so the approaches are very different from the get-go. Very different, and lead to very different places. All right. If you approach it from a brokenness model, of course, it's going to lead you to, maybe you feel some kind of relief that you're able to talk about it. You identify it as, I have some kind of syndrome, some kind of pathology, some kind of adjustment disorder, or a self-esteem problem. But it doesn't really get to the core of the psyche, which is in the unconscious mind. The Jungian coaching model says, if you see this as, okay, this is a natural part of the process, I might not like it, and you don't have to accept it. You're going to work with it. You're going to do something about it, but you don't necessarily approach it as something pathological in you. You're simply saying, this is the way the mind works, and if I want to transform it, I will have to accept that it is part of my mind. It's arising, that emotion is arising within me, and I have to do something about it, not externally. In other words, not satisfy the group and get into a relationship because it's going to make me feel better. It's almost like a security. You're seeking that kind of to soothe the ache. It's like scratching the itch. Yeah.
You have this itch of your conditioning, and then you scratch it with external things, and then the itch comes back. When you itch something, it keeps itching. Right. It's never enough, and then no matter what you do, it'll never be enough. Yeah, so Jung says the inner work, right? The going into the unconscious and becoming conscious of that, becoming conscious of the content in your personal unconscious. What it does, it liberates you from that wanting to fix it externally, needing to compensate outside, right? By either conforming and saying, okay, I'll get into any relationship just to fit in, or I'm going to be angry at this group because they're forcing me to conform, and pushing them away, rebelling, which is the same. It's just the opposite side of the coin, right? Jung says, no, the work is about accepting that is part of the inner work that you have to do, to come to terms with that
with that context that you're experiencing, in that social context, and to make a decision to say, you know what, I choose to be alone, or I choose to.
You want to make it a choice,
Yeah.
not your conditioning or your family pressure or the social pressure.
That's right.
To make you, like you said, conform to an idea.
Now, that is much healthier and much more satisfying because it liberates you from that conditioning. Not from it. You're not running away from the emotion. The emotion is actually the way you reach that consensus, the way you work with it, because it identifies where your work is, where your personal development work is. The emotion is the work itself.
It's the opportunity.
Yes. Whereas often it's in therapy models, it's seen as
the problem,
the pathology, something that you need to get rid of and gloss it over with positive thinking or positive thoughts. In the Jungian coaching model, the shame would be the good stuff because it's going to give you the key to your freedom.
And so there's also the element, what you said is the understanding that this is the nature of the mind, and the true freedom and liberation comes from when you realize you're more than just your mind. Your mind isn't all who you are. It's the ego's construction of reality and its perception and self-concept. But beyond that is our true self. So we're more than our minds. We're not the mind itself. The mind is sort of a function. It's not our identity. And I think we all identify with our thoughts way too much and think, well, I have this thought. This is my thought. And since I have this thought, this is who I am. And it's actually, we're more than just that, more than our thinking. And so how do we overcome shame? We don't want to get rid of it, but how do we transcend it?
Yeah. So as I was growing up and I became interested in Jungian psychology and Eastern philosophy and neuroscience, I started looking for these answers in those things. And again, I learned the medical model really well, the therapeutic models really well, because I had to learn them and I had to apply them with my patients and in groups. Also, I did a lot of group therapy, family therapy, individual therapy, people experiencing these kinds of emotions, shame, guilt, past traumatic experiences, etc. There's nothing wrong with those models because, again, the intention of people that practice these is to help the individual. And for me, I think for anyone that looks at people that train for years and years and practice these things, it's a noble profession to try to help other people and to be a healer in a sense. The only problem from my perspective was that it was within the context of a medical model, which means there's something wrong, something broken, and it's, let's say it's a gray area because there are people that do require that approach, that have been through wars or severe family traumas, that maybe they're young, maybe they're children and they need that approach for a while at least. But to be able to transcend or to overcome these kind of powerful emotions that are in the unconscious mind, the approach, and really this came more from the Eastern philosophy, the approach was that, of course, there's human suffering. Of course, there's human suffering. And because you have a body and you're experiencing these emotions, you're experiencing suffering in that sense. But that it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're broken in any way. It simply means that's the way the mind works when you are over-identified with a persona, ego, personality. You're experiencing things from that limited perspective of I, me, mine.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it's always limiting, and it cannot be fixed, and it cannot lead to like a complete liberation or transcendence of that experience, because you're still caught up in that paradigm that I have to fix this, I have to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we think about the persona shadow, the shadow, the two sides of the coin. So the shame, the opposite of shame would be acceptance, acknowledgement of others, belonging. And so we get attached to those things, and there's nothing wrong with wanting those things, but we're trying to get those things because we feel shame. We need the opposite to prove that we shouldn't feel ashamed. It works against us. So what we're really saying is you're seeing two sides of the coin. And for me, this is how I work with it. I sit with the emotion, and I always ask this question, like, what's my secret wish here? Like, why does this bug me? Why do I feel so terrible that this happened? And then I go, what is my secret wish? Oh, I wanted that person to accept me and acknowledge me. And then I got to see my attachment to that other, the outside. And it's like, oh, wait, I have to give that to myself. So you become more of an inner authority versus the outer authority, giving you that pat on the back. And once you have that inside, then the outside shows up differently. But if you're half trying to get it out there but feeling bad here, you're going to keep getting. It's never going to be enough. It's no matter how much money you make, how much success you get, even a relationship, the person could love you to death and it'll never be enough. You'll always be wondering, are they going to leave me? Did they love me today? Do they, are they losing that feeling? And it'd be so uncomfortable to be in a relationship. And going back to relationships, actually, I see this happen a lot when my clients first meet someone and they're kind of measuring, like, did they text me? Did they not? And it's a lot of anxiety. And what they're really working with is shame. They're really working with this, I want you to acknowledge me. I want you to tell me I'm okay. And giving someone, this stranger, all that power who just met you and you don't have any idea what their past is, or any person, whether it's a boss, whether it's a colleague, whether it's someone you admire, to give them so much power to acknowledge you, you give yourself away. And so it's about reclaiming the power. It's not making it wrong. It's saying, wow, I've lost my power here. It's a great red flag for you. And then when you go inside and acknowledge it yourself, the outside will change. You will stop getting those people that ghost you, or the boss that, doesn't give you that promotion, or the clients that aren't showing up for you if you're a coach. Everything shifts when you realize where you're hooked in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Shame, especially when it's unconscious, can play out in so many different ways. Definitely low self-worth, self-sabotaging behavior, running away from incredible opportunities because you don't feel like you deserve those things, or that you could live up to those things in the long run. Physical symptoms. We know some of the work that's been done in the mind-body area. When there are these powerful emotions like guilt and shame and grieving that have not been brought to the surface, the person holds them in the unconscious mind. They come out as physical symptoms, right? As autoimmune problems, as chronic illnesses. So very powerful emotions. That's why we emphasize moving towards them in an open, friendly way. Why an open, friendly way instead of trying to get rid of them and cure them? Again, because it is part of our psyche. It is like saying, oh, my hand hurts, therefore I'm going to chop it off and get rid of it. You don't want to do that, right? You know it's useful and it's part of you. You want to accept it, rehabilitate it, and pay attention to it.
Well, also, too, doesn't it help you understand other people and what triggers them and why they get, clingy or hiding, and as a boss to understand, like, your team members, what maybe they can,
yeah.
maybe you can understand and have empathy, like, oh, I get why she's afraid to ask for a raise, or why there's a hesitation here, or why her feelings got hurt when I didn't tell her she did a great job, or something like that. And I see this with my clients. They're always talking about their boss that never gives them those accolades, or gives the other person attention, and they make it in their mind that the boss doesn't like them. And then when they approach the boss is like, well, you're doing a great job, I don't need to constantly coddle you. But we understand like why people act a certain way when they get into those shame. We all share it. It's like a humanity. We all have it. And so whether we acknowledge it or not, and to have more compassion for others and humanity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always think, people think, the Buddha, when he was having this enlightenment experience, he was dealing with these goddesses tempting him, or, the demons trying to distract him from his goal. But actually, he was probably working on resentment towards the father, who tried to protect him from suffering in the world, and sense of abandonment, or rejection by the family, or his sexual impulses that he had to bring under control. Very human things. And if you look at his teachings, that's what he was talking about. How do you do these things? Well, you have to work with your mind. And that's the emphasis in Jungian coaching, that you're simply working with your mind in a natural way, and accepting that any of these impulses, no matter how bad people label them and how terrible they appear to us, they're simply part of our human experience. And they're there to teach us something. But we have to approach them in this open, friendly way. In other words, we have to say, what are you here to teach me? And often the best coaches are people that have gone through those difficult situations themselves, because they're learning it from the inside out. They're not just reading from a book or learning some technique. They're going through that transformation themselves, of approaching their mind, accepting it, bringing it into awareness, into consciousness, and integrating it.
It's sort of a softness and tenderness. I think, for me, I see a lot of anger that arises around shame. Like you get angry at yourself or angry at others for not acknowledging you, or like kind of it comes across as, I don't know, you feel as though people are mad at you, and why are they being so mean? And so is there an element of projecting shame on others?
Oh, absolutely. Anything that's unconscious, you're going to tend to project it onto others and to the external circumstances.
So you'll tend to, if you feel this, and haven't resolved shame, you'll tend to be a shamer in a way.
That's right.
And then you're like, I'm perfect, but you're
pass
bad.
it on.
Yeah, you pass it on.
You pass it on to the next generation. And in a sense, we're saying, I can't deal with this. You work it out, right? We're saying that to our kids, to our sisters and brothers, and
generation after generation.
Yes, to other people.
We're kind of that's how we've dealt with it. Either we retreat, or we shame and blame others, and we kind of move that energy somehow. And that's not really the way to work with it. The work with it is to bring that tenderness and compassion toward ourselves, and then we'll have more tenderness and compassion for others. So great topic. So any last words before we go?
Yeah, so just keep in mind, the way to work with these powerful emotions, definitely to acknowledge that they are powerful. We're not dismissing them. We're not saying, oh, that's just shame, don't worry about it. We're saying, no, you're going to have to work with it. But to work with it in this more approach, with this approach of a friendly, open, accepting way of letting it guide you, letting it teach you something about the nature of your mind, about the nature of your life.
Being an observer of this feeling versus in the feeling, step back and be that observer.
Yes.
And then see that you're not the mind. This is not who you really are. That your true self can never be harmed, can never be shamed, doesn't need that external acknowledgement. It's just the ego that needs it. We conditioned to get that external, everything we need externally, food, shelter, friendships, society externally, but the true self doesn't need all that. So we have that battle between our human self and our spiritual self that we're always dealing with, is how do we become a spiritual being and be aware of our humanity at the same time, and tender to ourselves when we do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing to someone. You just have compassion for yourself, that we're all acting out our own conditioning. We're all just, most people are walking through the world blind to their own conditioning and out of ignorance. There are very few people, I think, unless you're really sick, aren't intending to harm anyone. We're all trying to kind of survive. And sometimes we may do something that would hurt someone, but we don't realize it. And we have to have compassion and not guilt. The guilt is good to show us, oh wait, that might have been wrong, but not to shame and be this, I'm a terrible person and I should deserve terrible things to happen to me because I did these things. Yeah,
and also the resentment against the shamers, meaning the people that taught us that shame. Often we hold this grudge and resentment against that. And as long as we hold on to that resentment, we cannot really process our experience of shame properly.
And I often find that most critical people, they're really saying more about themselves than they are about you. We have to really remember that when someone is shaming you, it's really more about them. They don't even know you. So it tells really more about them. And that's really something to remember too, to not take things personally. And then when we are triggered, use it as an opportunity. So great. Well, we will see you next week on another Soul Sessions. Thank you for joining us. Feel free to write a comment below, ask us questions, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube and to our podcast on Apple iTunes and Spotify and all the rest. So take care, everyone. Hope you're enjoying this series, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.